Hi, Kathryn.
Hi, Patrick. How are you today?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. How have you been getting on?
I've been doing great. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. I think it'd be a cool conversation. And for any of you wondering what this conversation is going to be about, we're going to be talking about over drinking and overeating during the festive and New Year period.
Yeah, and this is a time that people tend to struggle with both. I work with more of the overeating side, and you work with the overdrinking side. So we thought it'd be great to come together and really try to help you feel more in control around food and around alcohol over the holidays.
Yeah. And that's such a key point, isn't it? Like feeling in control. Because I know so many Christmases where I've just felt out of control and just the whole month of December, I've ended up binging, whether that was on alcohol, whether that was on food. It was funny actually, because on my Facebook feed the other day, I had the Facebook reminders showing up. I think it was from 11 years ago or something, on like the 2nd of December. And it was a box of empty quality streets or roses, like the festive boxes of chocolates you get here in the UK. And like I'd already demolished one box, right? And
Mhm.
my girlfriend was making a joke about it and stuff. And like that's what historically it used to be like for me. Just the whole month of December, it's almost in my mind as I just took it off, and it meant I could do whatever I want. So
Yeah.
very much felt out of control sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a common mentality in December. Like, oh, I'll do everything now. I'll get all these behaviors out of the way. I'll overeat, I'll overdrink, and then I'll start fresh in the new year. But as we know, there's really nothing magical about January that makes you change. I know that I would make resolutions every year, but then by January 5th or so, I'd find myself back in the same patterns. So I do think the idea that you're going to start in January kind of serves as a justification to just do whatever in December and really can end up making you feel awful.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost like January's anti-magical a lot of the
I
time,
know.
right? Because it's after December where you have probably overindulged and you've spent a lot of money, generally speaking, on Christmas presents and going out and stuff. And so it's almost that time of month where it's you don't want to do anything, and your dopamine's just been so jacked up through December that you feel a lot lower in January, depending on where
Yeah.
you live in the world as well. Like I'm here in the UK, and it's kind of dark for a long time, and it's cold usually and wet.
Yeah, there's this idea that if you just have as much as possible with whether it's food or alcohol, then it will help you quit in January because you'll feel like, "Oh, I got it all out the way." But it's actually the opposite. The more you have, the more you reinforce those pathways, the more you put the substances in your body, the more you get hooked on it, and really the harder you make it for yourself in January, right? Not to mention what you said about it's cold, it's depressing, it's all the things that make it difficult.
Yeah. An analogy I've been using recently for some of the guys I've been working with is that when you take a break from drinking and you don't drink for like a sustained period of time, when you go back to drinking, if you have a drink for a one off or whatever, like guys find it really surprising how easy it is just to start that behavior again.
Mhm.
And I always say it's a bit like when you've got a fire, right? The fire's going, but if you just leave it unattended, eventually it's just going to die out. But if you stoke it, if you put a stick in there and you oxygenate it or you chuck another log onto the fire, all of a sudden it fires back up again, right? Like it gives it
Mhm.
energy. And so it's like stoking the fire,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think in food as well, people go long periods without binging and be doing so much better, and then an urge can come up. And I think the holidays is a time that people tend to get urges, right? We're around a lot of tempting food. There may be some habitual elements like you've binged in previous holidays. So the urges come up. You're kind of caught off guard, you follow it, and then suddenly the fire is stoked again. So it's really about, getting through those difficult situations, getting through those challenging moments, getting through those urges and allowing that fire just to keep dying down.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. There's so many associations I say the month of December, but really kind of around the holiday period, right? Whether
Hmm.
that's, I know for in the US and Canada, you've had Thanksgiving
Yeah.
recently. So that, you've almost started it that little bit earlier in terms of the expectation of having those big meals and stuff. And then, of course, we've got the month of December, and then New Year's Eve. Like, it's another way to celebrate. And in our cultures and societies, like, food and drink is kind of used as a way to celebrate. I had a really
Yeah.
interesting coaching conversation today with one of my clients, and he was talking about celebration, and he was saying he went to a wedding, and the in his mind, his brain was telling him the only way that he could celebrate was by drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fascinating, isn't it? It's because obviously that's not the only way, and he recognised that's what was happening. But I wonder, what are some of the things that you hear some of your people in your world saying when it comes to overeating during that period?
Yeah, it's such an interesting parallel because there's a mindset where in our culture where in order to celebrate you have to drink or you have to overeat. But it's really
Yeah,
stepping back and realizing that you can celebrate, without those things. And in my world, I definitely encourage people to eat enough food, to enjoy food, to take pleasure in food. And that's where the difference comes in that you don't need to drink alcohol at all to celebrate or survive. You need to eat to survive. And I teach people to give up restrictions. So it's really finding that balance of learning to celebrate with normal amounts of food, with normal amounts of dessert, with normal amounts of pleasure, and really learning that you can celebrate without making yourself sick. Doing harmful things to yourself is not a celebration. And I think it's really important, whether we're talking about drinking or eating, to make that disconnection in your mind between, celebrating and making yourself feel bad. Does that make sense?
yeah, definitely. And I think it can even be interesting to just define what does celebrating actually mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because drinking loads and eating loads, like, is that celebrating, or is that just eating and drinking loads? And so it's
Yeah.
like, what like, what actually is celebration?
Yeah. That's almost just a celebration for that primitive part of your brain. I know both of us talk about that.
Yeah,
It's like that habitual drive, those urges that come up that are motivating you toward that pleasure. And you're celebrating, yeah, that like rewarding that part of your brain. That's not true celebration when you think of it in terms of your higher brain and in terms of what you truly want for your life, who you want to be. The definition of celebrating to those primitive parts of your brain are very different from your idea of celebrating in your more rational brain.
yeah, that's really cool, just to be able to kind of have that conceptualization of, you've got your primitive lower brain that, for that, means celebrations means overindulgence in like high dopamine activities
Mm-hmm.
like drinking and eating, whereas the more rational higher part of our brain, executive part of our brain, that's about celebrating, like being with other people and whatever you want it to be, like an appreciation and acknowledgement, or just connecting and communicating with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think in terms of celebrating, there also can be a connection with like coping with the holidays. Some people think they can't cope with the holidays without over drinking, overeating,
Mm,
because sometimes when we think about celebrating over the holidays, people don't necessarily have that experience. Like the holidays can feel very stressful. The holidays can feel like they can't connect with family because of different issues there. Like all of us know that family can be very complicated. So it's almost like, okay, I can't celebrate and I can't even cope without eating or without drinking. So that can be a big thing that people need to overcome to make that disconnection, not only between celebrating and eating or drinking, but between coping and eating or drinking. Do you find that to be the case as well?
yeah, definitely. I think we create a lot of expectation on ourselves during this time, especially if you're the host, for example. Like, you want it to be perfect, you want everyone to have a good time, and in our brains we'll go, wow, everyone needs to make sure they've got enough food and enough drink, and like, all of these
Yeah.
things that go on. And it's funny because I've been thinking about this in a sense of how interesting it is at this time of year, more than any time of year, that we are, as human beings, just trying to recreate the same or similar experiences every year.
Mhm.
Like, we eat the same foods, we see the same people, we sing the same songs. Like, every year it's the same thing. It's like we're almost habitually living it out. And so we've got all of our favorite foods or all of our favorite Christmas drinks that we like to have. And as human beings, like, we are rooted in tradition and uh, what's the other word, rituals, and like all of these types of things, right? And so, but like, Christmas seems to be like that on steroids.
Yeah. 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 And once you throw in unhealthy behaviors and overindulgence, that becomes habitual too. And your brain will kind of automatically pull you toward that. And it becomes connected with the rituals maybe that you were even doing before you started the harmful behaviors, so that those kind of normal rituals then trigger those urges to overindulge, to overeat, to overdrink. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of things that get linked here, and it's about really trying to make those disconnections and realizing that you can be okay over the holidays without these harmful behaviors. And in fact, you'll be so much better off, right? Even if it is difficult to cope, even if it doesn't feel celebratory sometimes. And something I often tell my people is that, when you don't binge over the holidays, that doesn't mean your holidays will all of a sudden be magical and wonderful and perfect and you'll get along well with everybody. It's really expecting that you cannot binge even when it's tough, even when it feels hard. And I think that's really important, probably in giving up drinking as well. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because there can be this mindset of, oh, it's too hard, I'm just going to check out with drinking, I'm just going to check out and eat everything. And it ends up making you feel so much worse. So yeah, just realizing that giving up these things doesn't automatically make your holidays amazing.
No, I mean, if brutally honest, if anything, it might make them a little bit tougher to begin with, because you are going to be left with how you're feeling and all of those types of things that come up. But I think also, like unconsciously, how we put ourselves in situations where we are going to find it hard or tough, and so we do have a reason to overeat or overdrink. And I don't think we do it intentionally, but I think unconsciously that can be going on in the background as well. And I guess it's important to just, like going back to what I was saying about rituals, like just because you have done the same thing for years and years, it doesn't mean you have to continue doing the same thing for years and years. A bit like you're saying, right? It's about disconnecting. So I think there's a real opportunity to create new associations, new rituals, and perhaps new boundaries, right? If you don't want to spend time with certain people, then don't spend time with certain people. And yeah, that might be confrontational, or it might bring up some challenges for you, but you've got to protect yourself and what you want.
Yeah, I would love to dive into that more, because there can be a lot of pressure around the holidays to drink and to overeat. And there are certain people that, are more strongly pressuring you than others. So how do you recommend that people deal with that and that pressure to overdrink or drink at all?
Yeah, I think it's be honest from the outset. So if, let's say, for example, you're going to a relative's house and, they traditionally, most people are going to be drinking apart from the kids, maybe, just let them know from the beginning, like, I'm not going to be drinking. And like, drinking is just not an option, and be honest with them about why you're not drinking. Right. So I always say, drinking makes me feel like shit. Like, I don't feel good when I drink alcohol. It makes me feel depressed. It's really hard for somebody to try and pressure you to drink when you've been really truthful about why you're not drinking. So I think being honest with people, having a plan as well. So if you're going to be going to somebody else's house, don't rely on them to have drinks for you. Like, take your own drinks, right? Even if the host gets offended because you brought your own drinks, like, it's better to have your own things with you. It's the same with food as well, right? Like, if you want to take your own snacks, if you don't want to be going to other people's house and just being dependent on whatever's available, because that's when we can end up making choices that aren't in alignment with what we want, because we're like, oh, that's all they've got, well, I may as well have it, because then we don't want to be rude and all of these types of things as well. So being honest, having a plan. And then also, I think the third thing I would say about this is creating space for yourself, whether that is to just go for a walk, go hide in the toilet for 10 minutes, just do something that's going to feel like quite nourishing for you in those moments. So if things are kind of getting on top of you, just like take some time for yourself, whether you go for a walk, as I said, or do some breathing exercises. So yeah, there's a few ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so important to stay true to what you know is best for yourself and not be swayed into making decisions just to please others. And it's a practice, it's not easy. And especially if you've always done the same thing every year and then you come to the holiday event the next year and you say, I'm not drinking. And it's really just kind of allowing other people to have the reaction that they have and staying true to what you know is best for you.
Yeah. I think letting go of the all or nothing approach as well. I mean, we've touched on it a few times, but I know for me, like every year we go, right, Christmas is going to be different this year. I'm not going to overeat. I'm not going to overdrink. And then like by the first, 2nd of December, I've already kind of blown it out of the water according to my brain, right? Because of course I've still got a whole month where I can do something about it. But I go, oh, well, I just let myself off and then just carry on that cycle of overeating, overdrinking. And so rather than going, right, I'm not going to do this or that or the other, it's like, okay, so what will I do? What am I looking forward to? Like maybe I want to have the chocolates, but maybe I'm just going to have them on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, or like almost have a plan for yourself, so what to it. You know that you're going to have these things that you like, so you're not denying yourself. And it's also an opportunity to follow through with what you're saying and build trust in yourself. Like, yeah, I am the person who has one and then says that's enough. I think it's different with drinking
Hmm.
sometimes because it's there's, and it can happen with food as well, but like with drinking, because of the nature of the drug, it literally changes your brain, right? Like your decision making ability is impaired when you start drinking alcohol, which is really challenging.
Yeah, and that's something I find people who do struggle with binging, when they have alcohol, they have a harder time stopping binging. It's definitely something I hear a lot. And I recommend everyone look at themselves and how alcohol is affecting them. And is it making it harder for you to avoid binging? And if it is, it's probably time to take a break for a while. And that's why I think your stuff is so helpful. And I've recommended people listen to your podcast and check out all your information, because even if you're just taking a break in order to get the binging under control, it can be really difficult. And I think some people are approaching the holidays this year deciding, I'm not going to drink. And really, the main reason is because it makes it too hard not to overeat. And I liked what you said about like making decisions in advance and
Mm,
really thinking about how you want to handle these situations, these difficult holiday situations when there's a lot of tempting food, tempting drink. What is your plan? Are you going to have any alcohol? Like, I know that you a lot of times are teaching abstinence, and that's great. And for people who want to take a break from drinking to help them avoid binging, like your plan is likely no alcohol at all, and really sticking to that. And think of your plan for food as well. It doesn't have to be perfectly exact, but take some time to visualize yourself in that situation and visualize yourself eating a normal amount of food, a normal amount of dessert, an amount that's satisfying. Like, we never want to tip into restriction or like a lot of rules and obsessions around food, but really think about who you want to be, and also think of that from a place where you're not thinking of it from a restrictive mindset, but you're also not thinking of it from that primitive brain, pleasure driven, all or nothing mindset that's so harmful for us. You're really trying to look at it rationally and see it from a place of like, what would I recommend maybe someone else do in this situation? How would I tell a friend I love to eat dessert? In what ways is it going to give me pleasure without leaving me feeling bad after?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really great advice there. And it's that idea of like, I get to choose what I want. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can have anything. And that's so if you can almost get your brain to get on board with like, yeah, I can have these things that I want and I choose to have them. Like I get to have them when I want, rather than, oh, I'm not able to have them, but when they become available, I'm just going to have them. Because like your brain literally
Yeah.
goes into scarcity mode, doesn't it? It literally goes, we might not eat this again for the rest of our life, so let's eat as much as possible.
And I think that probably happens in alcohol too, like I talked about for people who want to take a break. Um, how do you recommend people deal with that scarcity mindset in relation to alcohol? Like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to have it again, and it feels so scary. Yeah, how do you recommend people handle that?
Yeah, good question. And that's why I say you're taking a break, right? We're not
Hmm.
committing to anything long term here right now. It's just you're going to take a break. But not only, you're not just taking a break from drinking alcohol, you're taking a break to see what it's like not drinking alcohol. or what it could be like not drinking alcohol. So you're looking to see like what some of the benefits of not drinking are, whether that's for reduced anxiety, better skin, weight loss, more energy, better sleep, right? The list could go on and on and on. So actually start focusing on those things. So what are you getting from taking your break? Rather than the scarcity mindset will go, oh, I can't drink this month, or I can't drink this week,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you kind of feel all miserable and sad, like you've been denied something. Versus like, oh, I feel like I'm really sleeping well this week and I've been super productive at work. So, you know, perception is projection, as they say. It's like what you focus on, you're going to create more of. So focus on the benefits of what you're doing rather than what you think you're losing as a result of not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so powerful just to increase your motivation, to keep you going when it feels hard. And yeah, just not to fall into that, oh, poor me, I can't drink. Look at everyone else having so much fun. Flipping your mindset to like, are they really having fun? How are they going to feel tomorrow? How are they going to feel later tonight? And really focus on how much better you're feeling without, really poisoning yourself, without overindulging in food in a way that makes you feel bad. That there's so many benefits of reducing both these behaviors, or in many cases giving up alcohol altogether, that yeah, the more you can celebrate that, the more you want to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really helpful to remember with alcohol and with certain types of food groups, UPF, like ultra processed food, like
Mm-hmm.
those, they're like literally designed to make you want more.
Yeah.
And so if you do find yourself reaching for chocolate after chocolate, it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because those foods have been made in such a way that they create intense desire in the brain to want to continue having those things. And like you said earlier, the more you do it, the more it reinforces that reward loop in the mind as well. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
it can be, having compassion for yourself as to why that behavior exists in the first place is not because you're broken or weak or uh, what's the word, greedy, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
actually because that's what happens when those foods go into our body. Like our brain is analyzing them in an incorrect way, so to speak, right? It thinks it's important for its survival, but it's not. Like as you say, we don't need drink, we don't need certain food groups. Some we
Yeah.
definitely do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it becomes like a tricky conversation in my world because you don't want to be overly restrictive either. And I also teach
No.
people that yes, it's so important, like you said, to understand that reaction in your brain, to have compassion for yourself. Nothing's wrong with you that you eat some dessert and then you want more. That's very, very normal. It's how our brain operates. It's how these foods interact with the pleasure centers in our primitive brain. So like just having that expectation is so helpful, and knowing that when you're around a lot of tempting food, that is going to happen. Like you don't go into eating your dessert, especially if you have this habit of overeating and binging, you're not going to go into a dessert and just eat it and feel so great after. Your brain is going to say more, more, more. And it's about realizing you're not powerless against that reaction. Like, yes, it is an urge, but you're not powerless against it. You can experience that. It's energy moving through you. It's just part of the way our brain motivates us to get what it thinks we need. But when you step back and get into your higher self and realize I don't actually need more of that, then you start to be able to pick reasonable stopping points for yourself. That's what I always tell people. Like you're not trying to be perfect, you're not trying to avoid every tempting food. You're trying to pick reasonable stopping points. And that's different for everyone. Like some people do have such a strong reaction to sugar that it can be helpful to take a break from that as well, because they don't feel able in certain moments to dismiss those urges. So it's going to look different for everybody. But the idea is not to be perfect. The idea is to eat in the least restrictive way that's possible for you, and to just learn to pick those imperfect, reasonable stopping points, and knowing that anytime you stop and anytime you're not following that drive for more, you're succeeding. I think that leads us into another topic, is that the mind will often say, you ate that food, you failed, you might as well binge. And that's, I guess, gets back to that all or nothing mindset. And just to not, with food, I think it's so helpful to not ever think that you failed, right? Even if you ate a little more than you wanted, even if you ate too much of those highly stimulating foods, as long as you're doing your best to pick a reasonable stopping point, you haven't failed, and it's never a reason to binge.
Yeah, exactly. So something someone said to me earlier on is like small small changes every day make a big difference, right? And so even if you just stop eating the food that little bit sooner than you would have done normally, or you stop drinking a little bit sooner than you would have done normally, like use that, track it so that you can build confidence in yourself that you can do that going forward. And I think like that word expectation comes up again, right? Like we can create an expectation of right, I'm not going to do this. And then the moment that that's in jeopardy, that's where the brain goes, we'll just carry on. But if you can expect that your brain is still going to offer you thoughts about having more, right? Learn to expect them so that you don't become freaked out when they show up. You can create that distance between yourself and your thinking. Like, yeah, of course my brain is trying to tell me to have another drink or is trying to tell me to eat some more food right now because that feels pleasurable. But like, check in with yourself and notice how you're feeling, and chances are like it's not what you need at all. I call them dopamine's, you know. But like a cross between dopamine and essential needs is that to check in and go, well, is this actual an essential need or is this a dopa need? And a dopa need is not what you need, right? Like essential needs are food, water, sleep, all these kinds of things. So it's that getting to know you, isn't it? It's a process of getting to know yourself.
Yeah. And kind of knowing your own limits and knowing, the difference between those needs and actual needs. And I really like that. That's a great word. I sometimes call binging a conditioned need, where like, it's not something you need, but it's something you've conditioned your brain into thinking you need. And it feels like a real need, but it's really kind of stepping back in that moment and realizing, okay, my brain and body are operating as if this is a real need, but I know it's not. I know I ate a normal amount of food. I know I'm okay. I know I'm safe. I know this urge can't harm me. And I think the urges, I always teach that the urges are the direct cause of the binging. And in drinking, I know that urges are a big thing too. And I'd love to get your perspective on dealing with these urges because, people on my podcast have heard me talk about it a lot. I saw you post on Instagram the other day about a strategy for urges, and I'm wondering if you could share that like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And so it's not mine. I heard about it, and I think it's really, really fantastic. And so it's this idea of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's an exercise to get grounded. It's an exercise to get present. So when we're having an urge, it can be very mental and feel very physical sometimes as well. By doing some exercises or using some tools that are going to help kind of disrupt those thought patterns. And so this exercise of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is number 5 is to look at 5 things around you and to name them. You could do that in your mind. You could say it out loud. I think saying it out loud is quite powerful because then when you're talking out loud, you can't be thinking about, going to the cupboard and getting another biscuit. And then the 4 is 4 things that you can touch. So then look around and again, touch and really touch them, right? Like what's around you? Oh, I've got this pen and it feels cold and there's some lines in it, and like get very sensory with that activity. So look for different textures, look for different shapes to really, again, right? You can already see that your attention is completely shifting at this point because you're focused on what you're doing. And then the third thing is 3 things that you can hear. 3 things that you can hear. And so like listen for 3 different sounds. So, I can hear my computer whirring. I can hear some birds outside. I can hear the leaves falling on my roof. And that's just like really quickly just checking in with my senses there. And then the second thing is 2 things that you can smell. And so 2 things that you can smell. Now, you might not have something in front of you. You might be going, I can't smell anything. Well, go find something that you can smell, right? Like maybe you've got a coffee or maybe you've got some food or a piece of fruit. Like pick it up and smell it and go, oh, what does that smell like? Like really get into that exercise. And then the final one there in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is to taste something. And again, you might taste your mouth and go, that doesn't taste very nice. Well, go find something that does taste nice or go find something that you are going to enjoy tasting. And then you've just given yourself so many different ways to break that. When people have urges, it's almost like your field of awareness goes from out here to here. it becomes so narrow, it becomes so constricted. It's literally the only thing that your brain can think about. I was in the cinema the other week, and I was like, right, I'm going to go cinema, and I want to break this association of just eating sweets every time I go in there. And my partner bought these chocolates, and they're in the seat next to me. And the most fascinating thing, like in my brain, it almost felt as if my brain was like trying to move down to where those sweets were. I was like, that's insane. Like that's like what an urge can feel like, right? It just can feel really powerful sometimes. But it's to remember, or by using that exercise, you can just totally disrupt that. You change those ways of thinking, you change how you feel, and all of a sudden you just feel free, like you've expanded your capacity again.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. It's just bringing your focus back to the present. And I think it can be so useful in a holiday event, right? Because there's so many things you can see and touch or smell or taste. And people who are trying to overcome binging may decide not to use the taste one, but that's okay. Like, right? Because if you're trying not to eat in that moment, but I think it's amazing for drinking. And you could even vary it up a little bit if you're thinking about eating. And also, like, if you're having an urge to binge, that doesn't mean you can't eat anything. You could taste something very mindfully and notice the taste of it and get yourself back into the present and realize how you consciously in your higher brain want to be eating and not just to be mindlessly following this urge.
Yeah, right. Like, what does an apple taste like? Like, what's
Mm-hmm.
it like to eat an apple? So that whole idea of being really mindful, like to hearing the crunch, and then hearing the softness, and then getting the release of the juice in your mouth, right? Like, and then like, what's it like as you continue crunching it, and just be like really spend as much time as possible about eating something and actually savoring it and enjoying it. I did that with a satsuma the other day. Like I ate the satsuma, and like there was so many different textures and elements to that whole experience, and it was beautiful. And then you can smell it afterwards as well, because you've got the skin of the orange as well that you can smell, and then that's got texture. So yeah, like I'm quite excited by it. But yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can use that exercise just to get out of that urge in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. People will tell me, okay, I'm in this event and I just can't even hear other people or focus on other people because all I'm thinking about is food and my mind has this one track. And yes, if you allow that to happen, and not that it's your fault, of course, this is habitual, this is primitive, but basically to give yourself agency that you can redirect. I always tell people just redirect, try to focus on something in your environment, try to focus on a conversation, try to realize that even though you have this urge kind of buzzing through your body and brain, you're still okay and that urge can't harm you. And just the more you can ground yourself and focus on what's around you, the more you get out of your own mind.
Yeah. And just to remember, like urges aren't exclusive to over drinking and overeating. They can show up
Mhm.
in lots of different ways. Mobile phones, like we can all attest to having urges to check our phone. And it goes back to what you're saying, right? Our brain thinks it's important. It thinks that, well, we need to check the news right now. We need to message this person back right now. And of course, we don't. We know that we actually don't. And so urges can show up in lots of different ways. And so we can use these exercises not only for disrupting urges to eat and drink, but also, where are some other areas that we notice that we have a tendency to like have a urgency and need to do something when in fact we don't actually. Because the more you practice these skills, and especially practice them when you don't need them, right? So if you're just sat there and you're not doing anything, you're like, oh, I could practice 5 4 3 2 1. So that in the moment when an urge comes along, it's an option, it's available for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we're all kind of versed in this already. And I think we have urges during the day that we don't act on and we don't think it's a big deal because it's just not an option in that moment. Like, anything that comes up that we just think, oh, that's crazy, I would never do that. And we just move on with our life. But when we get hooked on something, it just feels more urgent. It feels like, you know, it feels like a need, right? And that's the difference I think that needs to be made is that you have to move the behavior you don't want to do into the category of not an option and something that's just crazy and that you would never do, so that when you have those thoughts, they don't feel like a need anymore. They just feel like some crazy thing your brain is throwing out there. I teach people to label it as neurological junk. It's just something your
Yeah.
brain is throwing out. It has no meaning to you. It's not valuable to you anymore. It's based on what you did in the past, but it's not something you want to carry forward. And there can be some discomfort there. And I think that's important for people to accept too, that it may not feel the most comfortable thing to have these urges during these holiday events or any time, but that the discomfort you feel dismissing the urge is so much easier to deal with and so much better than the discomfort you feel after you've engaged in that really harmful behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you call them neurological junk is just finding a way to think about your urge rather than just being at the mercy of the urge, right? Like just thinking like, oh, I need, like, oh, I'm having an urge, like identify it, label it. Oh, that's neurological junk. Like, oh, that makes sense. I'm thinking this because that's what I've done in the past, right? So to create that distance so that you can disrupt.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Kathryn, are you noticing any common fears or doubts from people as they're coming into this festive period?
Yeah, that's a great point. It is definitely something that comes up a lot, the self-doubt, because if you have evidence of, let's say, last year or the year before that you fell into the temptation, you followed the urges, you binged, you ended up feeling bad afterward, you can fear that you'll do it again. It's this lack of self-trust. It's, some people will say, I know it's an urge, I know it's my lower brain, but I'm scared I'm going to follow it anyway. And yeah, it's something that I do think every minute you can not act on an urge, every hour you cannot act on an urge, every holiday event you go to and you don't act on them, the more your confidence builds. But I think a lot of times it takes having that success to start to build that trust with yourself. And I think there is a level of acceptance around fear that, of course, you fear it because you don't want it in your life. I tell people the fear is an indication that you don't want this behavior. Like, if you weren't scared of it, I think that would be a problem. Like, does that make sense as far as like the fear can point you toward what you actually want, which is to be free of this?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I always think or say that fear gives you more of what you don't want, right? But so when you're actually giving fear attention, because you're afraid of that thing, you end up almost manifesting that thing in a sense. But actually, it's almost like fear doesn't want you to change, because if you change, then you've got to do all these things that we've been talking about, right? Like, and you're not going to have the escape routes for coping mechanisms and getting the pleasure that your brain has become accustomed to. And so it's just like identify with that fear and go, okay, I hear you, I see you, fear. And just because it's been that way before doesn't mean it has to be that way again. Like, how can it be? Like, I don't even know what's going to happen in the next minute in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like there's many aspects of fear. Kind of what I was talking about was fearing the behavior and that
Yeah.
pointing you toward the fact that you don't want the behavior. And what I heard in what you saying too, there can be some fear of not doing the behavior because, oh, how will I kind of cope, or how will I deal with the holidays without this behavior? Let's say drinking has become sort of a crutch. I'm scared to be without it. Does that resonate?
Yeah. So fear shows you that you don't want something,
Mm-hmm.
but it ends up giving you more of it,
Hmm.
right? Because you're
Yeah.
afraid of it, because you
Yeah.
give it attention, because you go, oh, and then we become like self-fulfilling prophecies. So I think we're saying exactly the same thing. We're just coming at
Mm-hmm.
it from different angles.
Yeah. How do you recommend that people cope with this fear or move past it?
Identify, recognize, acknowledge that it is a fear. Like, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
fact. It's not real. It's just your brain running on old programming, trying to predict what's going to happen. And actually get curious, like, what's behind the fear? Like, if you're afraid of eating or over drinking, well, why is that? Maybe that speaks more to what you were saying, because, well, actually that's what I want. And then you can spend some time hanging around there and go, okay, so why am I doing this? Why do I want this for myself? So you
Yeah.
start giving it different purpose, and you understand, well, what's the role of fear? Like, why is fear here?
Yeah. And maybe there's a way to separate the fear. I think there can be some fear of the lower brain versus the fear of your higher brain. Your lower brain, your primitive part of yourself, that part of you that's hooked on the binging or the over drinking, it could be scared of being without it. Like, so some of your fear could be more of that primitive response of, oh no, I need this habit and I don't have it. And then your other fear of actually doing it, that's more from your higher brain. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. So it's almost like the fear is coming at us from two different parts of our brain.
Yeah, definitely. I think with fear, it's like always just walk into it, right? Right. What happens is I find with our mind or intellectual mind is that we will hear something and often we just kind of stop there with it. But actually, if we go, okay, so this is my fear, what's beyond that? Like, what happens if I walk into it? Like, what's the worst case scenario?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can flip it and go, okay, so what's the best case scenario? So rather than just being, oh, I'm afraid of overeating because I did that last year, to like challenge it, question it, like move towards it rather than be scared and moving away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you were saying, you don't want to give it all this attention, like in that you don't want to put too much attention on it, but acknowledging it and then realizing, okay, what can I do about it? And like you're saying, leaning into it, being curious about it. What's this about? And then also, I think, what actions can I take to make sure this fear doesn't materialize? Like if you're scared of really overeating and binging at a holiday event, okay, what do I plan on eating? Let's create a plan for myself. Let's decide on the amount of, dessert I want to eat and commit to dismissing urges after. I mean, for the people who are in your world and giving up alcohol, how am I going to deal with people who are going to pressure me to drink? How am I going to bring my own non-alcoholic drinks? Like different ways to take action that quell the fear.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all your higher brain, right? That's your
Mm-hmm.
reasoning, your logic, your planning, rather than just letting that emotional lower brain fear of, well, what are we going to do without these foods to cope, for example, or drinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Is there
Awesome.
any final thoughts around overeating, over drinking that you want to
Well,
share?
I think you touched on it earlier, and I think it's really important to remember is like it's progress, not perfection,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like there may be times over this period where you eat a bit too much or you drink a bit too much, but don't use it against yourself, and also don't use it as a reason to continue doing it, right? Like
Yeah.
really allow yourself to be curious about what happened, why it might have happened, and like what you can do differently the next time. The trouble is when we start attaching it to our identity and go, well, that's who I am, that's what I do, then it just reinforces that belief and that pattern. So we want to start looking and questioning it.
Yeah, that's a great, I think, final point is that we want to create an identity that doesn't involve those things. And that involves detaching from the old identity and the old habits and the old behaviors and really deciding who do I want to be, whether we're looking at the holiday season into the new year. How do I want to make these conscious decisions around food? How do I want to make these conscious decisions around alcohol? And then really committing to follow through with that, not in any sort of perfectionistic way. I mean, with food, it's so important to make sure you eat enough to not set all these obsessive rules. But yeah, I mean, just stepping into your own conscious awareness and creating that identity as a binge free person or as someone who doesn't struggle with alcohol.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Kathryn, thank you so much. Cool conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Patrick.